Gravação em curso. Olá, Michele, boa tarde.
Sí, está bien. Empezó a grabar.
Já começou a gravação. Já empecé a gravação, ok? Então, tu queres dizer algo antes de começar? Ou você pode? Eu posso pedir para ele começar. Inicia. Jocelyn, ¿se escucha?
Sí, doctora, se va a escuchar eco. Un momentito. Estoy tratando de que tal vez salga el audio. Ya. Bueno, buenas tardes, bienvenidas colegas. Vamos a continuar con el segundo día. El día lunes hablarán sobre el marco teórico y bueno, y hoy tenemos la participación nuevamente del equipo Voices Children Nursing, quien nos va a hablar de etnografía, hermenéutica participativa a nombre de la Red Internacional de Salud Infantil. Muchísimas gracias. Y los dejamos con la doctora Ivonne, que es nuestra mentora de investigación, quien va a dirigir el día de hoy el taller. Adelante, doctora.
Muchas gracias, Jocelyn. Vamos a dar inicio al segundo día de nuestro programa de entrenamiento para el desarrollo del proyecto de género, de Projeto CNPq, el Consejo Nacional de Investigación. El segundo día del proyecto que vamos a desarrollar la aplicación de Voice Children Nursing Framework en la producción y movilización de conocimiento sobre el cuidado de niños latinoamericanos. Entonces, nuestra invitada es el profesor Franco Carnevale, en su segundo día, que va a hablar sobre la etnografía hermenéutica participativa. Y entonces creemos que usted puede aprovechar bastante este momento y guardar las preguntas, o entonces puede escribir en chat. No hay problema, puede hacer las preguntas en portugués, o si le quiere en español, porque el profesor Franco está con el sistema de traducción también accionado, ¿ok? Franco, welcome to the second day. It's my pleasure to introduce you again. And I hope that we have a very nice end of the day for Brazil. I suppose that the beginning of the night. Okay. Now you are the speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivone, and hello to everyone. I am assuming that most of you, maybe all of you, were present on Monday, so I'm not going to do the bigger introduction that we did on Monday. And if you were not there, there is a recording that is available to you. So we will jump right in. So on Monday, we talked about childhood ethics. We talked about the voice framework for working with young people. And so today we're going to take all of those big ideas and see how we can operationalize them in order to conduct research with young people. And so next slide, please, Ivone. So today we're going to focus specifically on participatory hermeneutic ethnography. And those three things, each one of those words could be an independent seminar. So we're going to take all of those three, talk a little bit about each of them, and then look at how you put them together into one study. Next slide, please. And just to remind everybody, so that I lead this childhood ethics project that we call VOICE. It's based in Canada, but we have many international affiliations, and this is one that is incredibly dear to me and to us. This is a fantastic opportunity. We have a lot of great things we're going to do together. Next slide, please. All right. So participatory hermeneutic ethnography is a methodology that we designed within our VOICE team because we were not satisfied with any single one of the individual methodologies that were already being used. We really wanted to develop a methodology that was specifically adapted and oriented to the experiences and the socio-political realities that young people live in. Next slide, please. I want to also tell you that next week, for the last seminar, we're going to talk about analysis. Now, the separation of analysis is somewhat artificial because with hermeneutic investigations, data generation and data analysis are always being done together, and they're very reciprocal and reciprocally informing each other. And so I know that a lot of what we will be talking about today, you'll wonder, how do we interpret and how do we make sense of all of this data? So we will talk about that next week. So I just want to acknowledge that that's a little bit this artificial separation. Today we're going to talk mainly about data generation, and then next Wednesday we'll talk about data analysis. More and more we use the term data generation rather than data collection, because data collection is somewhat based in positivism, where you went out there, you collect data, and you put them through machines, and then you have results. So I'm going to say data generation to demonstrate that data is being constructed. It's a social construction. Next slide, please. All right, so we're going to take each term somewhat separately at first. So right now, we're going to start by talking about the participatory part of participatory hermeneutic ethnography. Next slide, please. So participatory approaches, there are many of them, and critics of participatory research will say that a lot of participatory research is quite superficial and sometimes not really sincere. A lot of times there's a feeling of checking the box, and even the participants will say they felt that they had high expectations about being true participants in the full sense of the term while they were participating in a project, but then felt disappointed in that their participation felt very superficial. This is even more so with young people, where there is a presumption that they are immature and incapable. And so truly sincere and respectful participatory approaches with children and youth are very hard to find. Genuine, sincere participatory research really tries to carry forward this saying that nothing about us without us. It is disrespectful, first of all, ethically disrespectful, to not be fully inclusive in the way we do research in relation to a particular population without doing it with them. It shouldn't be for them, and it should not be on them. But it is not only an ethical concern, it's also an epistemological concern, in that how can we really generate good knowledge when it is separate from the people who really are having those experiences and have an interest in the way in which the knowledge will be used. Next slide, please. Now, how could we talk about participation without talking about someone that some of you may have heard of before, Paulo Freire? So we're talking about Latin American research, and we're talking about participation. Well, Paulo Freire is an international figure whose work I wish I knew more, and I am learning more and more. Ivone has been guiding me quite a bit in his work. I've put on this slide 2 books in Portuguese that have been given to me by students. And for me, when a student gives me a book, it's a testimony to what Paulo Freire says at the bottom of the slide. Whoever teaches learns in the act of teaching, and whoever learns teaches in the act of learning. First of all, it's a beautiful, beautiful expression. But for me, it's such a feeling of honor when a student is trying to educate me, is trying to tell me, take a look at this, and then we can have a dialogue about it, because it shows me that they are very meaningfully participating, not only in their learning, but in the exchange with their teacher, me. Next slide, please. And in keeping with that, again, drawing on Paulo Freire, he wrote that the more people participate in the process of their own education, and the more people participate in defining what kind of production to produce, and for what and why, the more people participate in the development of themselves. The more people become themselves, the better the democracy. This is really demonstrating the importance of, we can't really do any meaningful work in research, in policymaking, in developing systems and services and programs without really respectful, reciprocal engagement with those who will be impacted by any of those things. And so meaningful, sincere participation, Paulo Freire anticipated the world, really. It was ahead of so many people in really understanding it in a very genuine way. And later on, I'm hoping that Ivone will offer some suggestions, because I realize that my understanding of Paulo Freire is immensely superficial. Next slide, please. Participatory action research, participatory research is very strongly affected by these ideas from Paulo Freire. The idea that participation really involves this kind of meaningful engagement of those who are going to be impacted. And these are just a few examples, very, very few examples of the ways in which participatory researchers are drawing on Paulo Freire's ideas. And just to go back to one of the people I cited yesterday, Walter Omar Cohen, a philosopher child who's based in Rio, he's also published this article where he looks specifically into Paulo Freire's teachings in relation particularly to young people, which is also super cool. Next slide, please. So with all of that in mind, let's look at, for the work that we want to do, how do we think about participation meaningfully, sincerely, with true engagement? How do we think about participation as a political orientation? It's a recognition that young people as agents have an interest not only in themselves, but also in the people and the world around them, including the climate, the politics, the economy, that young people as agents are also political agents. Next slide, please. Voice was very proud a short while ago to have this paper, this commentary published in the Canadian Journal of Public Health, where we argued that going forward, all research that affects young people has to be conducted with young people. And in fact, we argued here that research policy making and practice needs to be conducted with young people. All but two of the authors here, all of the authors except two of them, are in fact members of the Youth Advisory Council for Voice. So most of the authors here are youth. And here what we've argued is that at the very least, at the lowest level, participation means actually having young people participating in the research. To this day, many people are still doing child and youth research that doesn't even include youth. That it's like either parents and sometimes it's just clinicians, it's just professionals. And then they are speaking on behalf of the experiences and what young people's needs are. So at the very, very least, studies need to at least include them as participants. But that's still, that's still so minimal. We need to go beyond that. And right now, what we're working with is models of working with youth as co-researchers, where we are conducting research together. And in some examples, we've had studies where youth have actually led the research. And some of us professors were kind of more technicians. We provided methodological expertise, we put the priorities, the sampling plan, the data generation plan, the interviews was really directed by the youth themselves. More and more commonly, we are working with youth as advisors. They advise on policy making, practice development, and designing research. And in doing that, they require respectful remuneration, that they should be paid for their time. And the model that is being used more and more is a youth advisory council. That is what we have with Voice. Our Voice program has a youth advisory council, but then has connections with other youth advisory councils. Next slide, please. The Canadian Journal of Public Health was so moved by the commentary that we published that very recently they actually changed their editorial policy. And they're basically, any manuscript that is submitted to the journal, if the research relates to young people, the authors have to declare how were young people involved in this research. If young people were not involved in the research, the authors have to explain why. And that is part of the editorial review process. This is a big achievement, and this was a Voice initiative. So to have the journal recognize that we are perpetuating the epistemological oppression that I referred to on Monday by having systemic exclusion in the ways in which we assume who the experts are, who gets to decide what the priorities are. Next slide, please. And so the structure that we use that I just described is a youth advisory council. Those are becoming very popular. So we have a voice youth advisory council. We have voice youth, indigenous youth advisors for research that relates to young people. And these serve as a core. And then our youth advisory council has formal agreements with other youth advisory councils when we might have specialized studies that relate to disability, neurodiversity, schooling, mental health, and so on and so on and so on. So we've got a big network of other specialized youth advisory councils that we are connected with. Next slide, please. I'm very proud to announce that just a few months ago, we started the first, to our knowledge, first health-related youth advisory council in Italy. Because Voice has engagements at the Università di Genova, where I work. And so we have a youth advisory council, and the youth designed themselves this logo, and they created the name Controvento. Controvento means going against the wind. And that's that they really feel that the wind is pushing against them, and they need to resist, and they need to go against it in order to go for what they believe is necessary. And they added the English up to youth to really basically imply the way they meant it is it's up to you, really wanting to promote that young people take responsibility for becoming involved and participating. Next slide, please. I spoke briefly on Monday about how in research that we were doing in India, we were able to work with partners within India to mobilize a youth advisory group that they had of childhood cancer survivors. And we conducted an ethnography. And then we also published a paper where we created an ethical framework, which was all done in very close collaboration with a youth advisors, basically youth survivors of childhood cancers within India. So we have a growing body of research that demonstrates ways to do this. Next slide, please. Now, despite all of this, I want to tell you, there is very little knowledge about how to promote youth engagement, how to conduct these kinds of participatory practices. How old should youth be if they're going to be advisors? What experiences need to be represented in a group of youth who are providing advisory input? If they are doing research on cancer or palliative care, do they have to have lived experiences? Can it be the brothers and sisters? All of those kinds of questions. How should they be remunerated? There is very little knowledge on this. We have a review coming up that will be published very soon, where we've looked at what the literature is saying on this, but there is very little knowledge. And so it's basically a lot of advice that everybody's giving each other. Next slide, please. So because of the lack of knowledge, we were fortunate to get a major grant, a 5-year grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, a big one, where right now this is really our main research focus within Canada, is to really do research by consulting with youth throughout Canada in different sectors and different experiences within health, as well as in schools and in community organization and youth protection, to find out what are their experiences about participating and what are the barriers that they face. This grant was awarded to the faculty as well as to the youth advisors of Voice. We were recognized as co-researchers in the design and in the leading of this research. Next slide, please. So that was a little bit about participation. Now let's move on to the hermeneutic, which is probably the most abstract of the three. And for some of you, what I'm about to say might be obvious, and for some of you, what I'm about to say might be new. And so I've tried to find a middle road on how to talk about hermeneutics. Next slide, please. So hermeneutics is a very broad field. Its origins is within philosophy, and in fact, before that was really in theological philosophy. Hermeneutics is a discipline that first was created within theology and was really the discipline of interpreting religious texts. It was then brought to the foreground and really introduced within the human sciences by Gadamer. Now, Gadamer a former student of Heidegger. Heidegger really brought forth how phenomenological inquiry always requires interpretation, but really didn't develop that much further. It was Gadamer who came along and really developed what some people call the science of interpretation. So his book, which is a classic, Truth and Method, really develops a very advanced ontological, epistemological framework for how interpretation is socially and culturally embedded, and that you can't do interpretation in a very individualistic way. Interpretation requires an analysis of horizons of understanding. And I'm going to just leave it at that, because these are, I mean, we could spend hours just talking about that. Now, the work by Gadamer and by Heidegger was then taken up by more recent philosophers, and the one that we've been working with in particular, and mainly because he lives in Montreal, and so he's been accessible to us, to me, and that's Charles Taylor. But Charles Taylor is also very, very highly respected philosopher, hermeneutical philosopher. And so he took a lot of these broad areas and then really developed some classic publications on how to conduct hermeneutical inquiry. A couple of key points I want to highlight here, because they will come up after in this presentation. And that is, hermeneutical analysis always involves a shifting between the part and the whole. It's very different from positivism, where in positivism, there's a high value on reductionism. And basically, if you want a positivistic view thinks that you can understand pain and suffering by looking at molecular and neurological pathways, and that somehow that is the essence of pain. While hermeneutical inquiry always involves a shifting from looking at the micro to the macro. You're always going from the part to the whole. And I will try to demonstrate later on in this presentation how we actually do that. But it means that we have to study the whole. And the whole means looking at a community, or maybe sometimes even looking at societies. What are some of the ideas within a society? Because they have a big impact on people's experiences. And so Taylor advanced these notions of horizons of significance and moral imaginaries. Taylor was a major influence then on Patricia Benner, who some of you may know of. Her work on Novice to Expert is renowned. She's probably the most famous living nurse in the world. But she also published Interpretive Phenomenology and was a leader in interpretive, qualitative research methodologies globally. Really was a huge influence. Now, her work was based entirely on Charles Taylor's philosophy, occasionally referring to other hermeneutic philosophers that I'm not going to talk about here, Ricard, just Merleau-Ponty. So there are other important philosophical works that are key here. But Taylor has integrated in a way that Benner was able to translate all of this into a qualitative methodology. So she was really one of the first to really operationalize these philosophical ideas into a qualitative methodology, not only in nursing, in the health sciences. So this was incredibly important. Next slide, please. As I mentioned before on Monday, for anybody who just can't get enough of this and wants to know more about Charles Taylor, we in this special edition try to take a lot of those ideas and make them accessible to people who are beginners in understanding this work. Next slide, please. And I want to just remind those who are, I'm not going to repeat the details here, but if you want to understand hermeneutics in the way in which Charles Taylor defined it, we need to understand these concepts of horizon of significance. How within a community are things considered of value, of importance? We don't, as much as we think we do, we don't define what matters individually, because we are embedded in relationships in our family, in our community, within our society, and those social networks are strongly influential in determining what matters the most as we try to navigate these horizons of significance. Meanwhile, social imaginary is the ways in which a society defines, for example, what kind of a being is a child. On Monday, I talked about how young people are generally considered human becomings and not full human beings because they're considered immature, incapable, and incompetent. Well, that's part of the dominant social imaginaries of many societies. The young people are immature. They're generally considered the property of their parents, where parents can decide what kind of access to information about sexuality and other kinds of things that they can have access into school. So all that is strongly determined by social imaginaries that see young people as their parents' property. That, and in many ways, if you look at policies, that's still present today. It was officially the case, a couple of 100 years ago, where parents could do anything they wanted with the child. Now children have rights, but in the social imaginary, those rights are often interpreted of young people as parental property. So that's further explained in my paper there at the bottom of this slide. Next slide, please. I'm going to just run through these next pieces because these are important concepts in participatory hermeneutic ethnography. And in the hermeneutic part, I described on Monday how the focus is not on immature young people, but rather young people as moral agents. Next slide, please. And again, if you want to know more about that, there's a whole paper, philosophical paper that I wrote about that. Next slide, please. And I want to also remind everybody, I want to elaborate on here, that agency, we have advanced the idea that through our research, that agency has a threefold structure, that young people as moral agents have aspirations, hopes, meaningful hopes, not like I want to have chocolate today, but rather, things that matter, the ones that stand out more than anything else. And young people are able to reveal those. And this is important to help orient the ways in which we might want to design our inquiries with them, to be able to help use our power as researchers to convey, to reveal that they have these meaningful aspirations. They also have concerns when they experience that their aspirations are not valued or going to be blocked. And they also have continually growing and developing capacities to navigate the pursuit of these aspirations and the barriers that they face, which generate concerns. Next slide, please. And I also introduced for the first time ever to the world on Monday that we've identified this other feature of agency, that young people's emotional expression needs to be interpreted as an expression of agency, that they are showing how things matter for them, favorably through joy and happiness, and unfavorably through distress, upset, and so on. And these help us identify through this emotional salience the things that are particularly at stake and meaningful for them. Next slide, please. I want to reiterate, this one is important in terms of the way we design our research. So this is a study where myself, Gail Teachman, an occupational therapist, and Aline Bogosian, a social worker, we pool our research with children with complex healthcare needs to be able to demonstrate how to understand the agency of young people with significant disabilities. And in particular, in all cases, this involved children who communicate in ways that are difficult to understand by other people. And so children, we might say children who communicate differently, children, what is sometimes referred to as a communication impairment, but we don't want to use a deficit language. They communicate, the problem is those of us who can't understand them. And so what this analysis showed is that clearly agency is not autonomy. Agency is relationally embedded, and the expression of agency is expressed through meaningful relationships. And what we were able to demonstrate is that if you have trouble understanding a young person, or if you have trouble establishing a trusting, safe relationship with them, to consider their relational network as a potential source, as an interlocutor. How, for example, a parent who knows a child well, a child who communicates differently, can be an interpreter, not a language interpreter, but an interpreter of what they are expressing. And sometimes this could also be a nurse who has worked with a child who communicates differently, can be able to identify in their interpretation of what the child expresses on, is this going okay or not? Is the child expressing assent or dissent, agreement, disagreement? So this is very, so similarly in research, if we're going to conduct research with children who communicate differently, because we need to be mindful that children are already oppressed through the presumption that they are young and immature. If we exclude them in addition to their youth because they communicate differently, then we're going to be taking care of children with complex care needs, as it says here, without knowledge. So we need to advance our knowledge. And whether it's children who have complex healthcare needs, children who are on the autism spectrum, who may communicate differently because of a neurodiversity, we need to be maximally inclusive and ensure that we don't have a built-in systemic criteria of exclusion, which therefore results in us being permanently ignorant. We'll be the ones who are ignorant and incapable of being able to understand, and therefore they will have delayed knowledge advancement in terms of their interest. Next slide, please.
Franco, before you move to the next slide, I can see many Paulo Freire ideas over there.
Go ahead.
Many Paulo Freire ideas.
You want to say it in one of the Latin languages?
Yeah, I can say that. Ok. Então, grupo, ok, pessoal, eu consigo visualizar muito da teoria teoria freiriana, né? Filosofia, vou chamar de filosofia freiriana, com as várias categorias de análise de Paulo Freire. Uma delas é exatamente a dificuldade que o educador, se a gente fizer esse transporte, o educador compreender para desenvolver um projeto de escolarização, de alfabetização, de conhecimento, né? Então, esse encontro entre o conhecimento que o educador não tem sobre o educando é o que mobiliza o educando a conhecer melhor, aliás, mobiliza o educador a conhecer melhor o educando e construir o processo pedagógico a partir do conhecimento que o educando tem, né? Então, o que ele diz na teoria, principalmente na teoria da conscientização, né, é que a tomada de consciência do educador sobre o conhecimento do educando é que movimenta o processo pedagógico, o processo de ensino-aprendizagem. E na pedagogia da infância, que é uma área que foi muito pouco explorada, né, pelos autores que trabalharam com Paulo Freire, ele traz o papel da criança no processo de construção do conhecimento, na alfabetização, do conhecimento na escola, a partir da experiência e do engajamento, da participação e do engajamento coletivo. Então, acho que tem essa base freiriana da participação da criança e o reconhecimento dessa criança com suas aspirações, suas preocupações, a sua capacidade de interpretar o mundo, né, é que mobiliza a construção do conhecimento. Eu acho que essa ideia, né, central, né, na pesquisa, quando nós desenvolvemos a investigação com a criança, da gente está buscando o conhecimento que ele tem. Né? Eu vou tentar desligar o microfone aqui. Ok. Deixa eu ver dessa pessoa. That's okay, Franco. I try to explain how to. I don't know if you put the translation in English.
Yeah, fine. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but it's the idea that we have from Paulo Freire. I think that they're very, very connected. When you talk about it, I just think about Paulo Freire talking the way the educator can work with the child, just recognize the knowledge they have.
Gina is going to add her reflections.
Ivone, eu queria te ouvir um pouco mais, porque fiquei aqui pensando como o contexto é importante, né? E como é que nós podemos facultar contextos que podem produzir, né, condições para que essa criança tenha voz.
Veja bem, se eu olho para o método Paulo Freire, eu estou olhando aqui o método Paulo Freire de apreensão do conhecimento do outro. Ele sempre trabalha com a materialidade, ele trabalhou e ele recomendou o trabalho com a materialidade. Então, ele iniciava, por exemplo, uma sessão de alfabetização com pessoas que trabalhavam, trabalhadores da construção civil. Ele pedia para o trabalhador da construção civil trazer o objeto do trabalho, aquilo que produzia significado para ele, né? E esse conceito de silêncio, silence, emotional silence, é a opressão, né? O indivíduo oprimido. Esse indivíduo oprimido que ele só sabe se expressar, ele sabe enunciar, aí vem uma contribuição da filosofia da linguagem de Mihail Bakhtin, ele só sabe enunciar e se expressar pelo aprendizado que ele teve na vida, pelo conhecimento que ele construiu com a vivência e experiência. E a criança, a gente acha que ela é uma tábula rasa, que ela não tem um conhecimento adquirido nas relações interpessoais, que ela não tem capacidade para compreender aquilo que ela está vivendo, e você tem razão, no contexto. É no contexto que o conhecimento é produzido. É nas relações e nas interações que esse conhecimento é produzido. E a criança, ela não é apagada de sentido de conhecimento. A gente que não sabe capturar isso. Por isso, a gente precisa entrar no que ele chama do imaginário social. Não é o imaginário psicológico, o imaginário só afetivo, mas é o imaginário construído nas relações sociais, né? Então, acho que você tem toda a razão, Regina. O contexto é fundamental, e às vezes você olha, por exemplo, eu tenho uma experiência de não sei se ela está aqui, a Jéssica, ela fez um estudo de observação etnográfica, aplicando a etnoenfermagem, numa enfermaria de crianças clinicamente complexas, com encefalopatia crônica não degenerativa, e que as pessoas diziam que ela não respondiam à interação. E essa criança, ela observava que o contador de história, quando contava a história, ela ficava prestando atenção na história que era contada na cama ao lado, no leito ao lado. Quando as pessoas se comunicavam, tinham acho que 2 ou 3 técnicos de enfermagem que se comunicavam com ela, e ela interagia o tempo todo. Ela sorria, ela ela virava o rosto. Então, aquele processo de comunicação residual, os elementos da comunicação residual, ele utilizava para se comunicar. E o técnico de enfermagem falava, ele sabe que eu estou falando com ele. E a mãe dizia, ele sabe que ela está contando a história. Ele adora essa história. Toda vez que conta essa história, ele fica mais calmo. Então, a participação da criança é a gente que tem que capturar. Então, quando eu acho que fala de uma pesquisa participatória com a criança, é você desenvolver ferramentas para capturar o que está no contexto, sabe, Regina? Isso é freiriano, porque ele dizia para ela, professores, olhe o seu aluno, ele dizia, né? Professor, olhe o seu aluno, ele tem muito a ensinar e aprender, e você aprender e aprender nesse processo. E a escola freiriana é uma escola, eu não sei se vocês conhecem, a escola freiriana é uma escola que não tem carteira, que não tem quadro, que tem vivência, pura vivência. As crianças vivem aquele cotidiano, né? Vivem o cotidiano e eles vão aprendendo dentro do cotidiano, e eles aprendem as mesmas coisas que uma criança numa escola com carteira, né? Assim, eu acredito muito na potência, sabe, Franco? I really believe in this possibility, no? To listen to children in another way. I think that we need to use another way to listen to children.
So in light of your reply to Regina, I'd like to add 2 more points. So I work as a clinical ethicist, and one of the areas where I work as a clinical ethicist is in psychiatry, so children with mental health problems. So if you think the children are not listened to, add a mental health problem to that, and you see that their views are really not valued. And most clinicians use the legal concept of capacity, mental capacity. Do they have the mental capacity to know what's going on and to make a decision about their care? In the work that we have been doing in our mental health ethics committee, which I chair, and we've been doing an analysis of a whole bunch of consultations, and we have demonstrated how capacity, mental capacity, is not a fixed cognitive phenomenon, but it is a relational phenomenon. That in fact, we have been able to demonstrate the way in which you create a safe space, you have people present that the child wants to have present, you use a language that is oriented to the language that the child uses, you respond to their questions and to their expressions and to their silence in a way that is respectful. We have seen the approach that we use can help elevate their capacity to participate, or it can diminish. And most of the times, we create barriers to their participation by speaking in a way that they don't understand and by having an attitude that demonstrates, we think you're immature and ignorant and therefore don't talk, and they won't talk. And so it's very dynamic. And so similarly, in the way in which we would conduct research, we need to be mindful of this, is to really be careful about a priori exclusion of who can contribute and participate meaningfully in a study, because our relational approach can really help to amplify their participatory capacity. So that's one point. But the last point, when you're specifically making some references to Freire and the sort of the reciprocal nature of the teacher and learning dynamic, teaching and learning dynamic that can go on, is if you bring an approach of humility and really sincere curiosity. A lot of childhood researchers are demonstrating how older people, by older people, I don't mean old people, I mean adults. It's another way to define as an adult, is that young people can help us remember and rethink certain kinds of things, like the importance of play. Playing is, in fact, a really deep-rooted, important human activity that social imaginaries have defined as silly. Once, silly things that children do, and then once you grow up, you have to be serious. Whereas we know that play really can awaken our experience and our awareness and our movement within the physical and social world around us. Clearly, our understanding of the climate, that if you listen clearly to young people, we will understand the intergenerational violence that is being perpetrated by so-called mature, responsible, capable adults who are just really focusing mainly on economic or political features. So wonder, how you can just take a moment and really experience deep fascination in a particular moment with what is presenting. There's a lot that young people can remind us or teach us that we will be open to if we can deal with our adult attitudes that presumes that we are the only teachers and they are ignorant and have nothing to teach us. Next slide, please. One last concept, and I'm not going to elaborate on it, that I talked about also on Monday, and that's moral experience. So moral experience is an empirical concept. So agency is conceptual, it's abstract, but we can understand agency concretely by doing research on young people's moral experiences. When we do research on moral experiences, we help reveal young people's agency. Next slide, please. Because we're trying to understand the ways in which they navigate what they consider good or bad, just or unjust. In general, when we are doing research in voice now, more and more, we just use the word experience because we find people outside of our cult, they hear the word moral experience and they think we're very strange people. Like we talk a very strange language, and we do. So we just say experience. And then when we define it in our research design, we say what we mean by experience, and that is experience regarding the navigation of morally meaningful matters, like right or wrong, just or unjust. Next slide, please. All right. So we've described participation. We've described what hermeneutics is. So ethnography should be the easiest one. It's quite familiar to many of us. So let's take a look at ethnography, what that is, and then we'll put it all together. So next slide. So ethnography, its roots are in anthropology. And I had the good fortune of doing a 1.5-year fellowship in anthropology after I did my first PhD. And ethnography is really renowned. It started originally as the study of cultures and has been taken up by various health professions. And so we have clinical ethnographies being conducted by various types of health-related researchers. But let's take a moment to go back to what ethnography is supposed to be, because some of the ways it has been taken up in health sciences research is sometimes not true to what ethnography is supposed to be. So ethnography was designed as a methodology that an anthropologist goes to a faraway place, is immersed in a community, and really looks at all of their practices within that community, and then really does a cultural analysis of life in that community. And so the idea is that you can study social cultural communities in their natural settings. You don't take people away from that community and you bring them into an interview room, which is not natural. And you can understand social practices as they are conducted. So rituals, the way people move, for example, death rituals in certain cultures, the ways in which people try to remember and honor the person that has died. Now, within anthropology, Clifford Geertz, whose name is there at the bottom of the slide, in 1973 published this really extraordinary book called The Interpretation of Cultures. So Clifford Geertz put forward an interpretive / hermeneutical methodology for ethnography that has revolutionized the work of many anthropologists. And he put forward the idea that the work of an anthropologist is thick description. And that is, by thick description, he means deep interpretation. So you don't just take the things that you see or the things that you hear and describe them, because they don't speak for themselves. Their meaning is not self-evident. You need to analyze them in terms of underlying cultural beliefs, values, traditions, and so on. That's how you understand silence, for example. That's how you understand emotional expression and what it could mean. Is by understanding what are the underlying cultural values and beliefs and practices that are related to what you are seeing. So now this approach to ethnography in the last 40, 50 years has increasingly been adapted for research in the health sciences, in the health field, as well as in schools and other things. And so the idea is it's not only for anthropologists, but it can be studied in all kinds of, you could do an ethnography of young people living on the street. You could do an ethnography of an emergency department. And you treat those as a faraway village. You have to go in there and consider them strange and try to investigate them ethnographically through thick description. Next slide, please. So drawing on this work, I published this idea of children's, like a thick conception of children's voices, where when we are eliciting a child's expression in research or in practice, this article was designed for both in research and in practice, we need to interpret what we see and hear using this thick description that Clifford Geertz put forward. It's not, and this is my worry with a lot of the way in which nursing research and a lot of health research is being done, where we do only interviews and then we code all the words, we do line by line analysis, and we have themes, and we just have this assumption that the words say everything. The way in which we interpret those words can be incredibly variable, and it could be quite completely ethnocentric, completely ignorant of the community and the cultural life of that young person. By culture, I don't mean ethnicity now. By culture, I mean the social world and the shared understandings and values that the participant lives in. And so we need to design our research in a way in which we are analyzing the underlying meanings, the horizon of significance. And by the way, Clifford Geertz and Charles Taylor knew each other, and they had exchanges in the literature as well. So they're both hermeneutic. One's a philosopher and one's an anthropologist. And so thick description allows us to analyze silence, body movement, posture, play, art, and all of these are expressions of agency and can only be interpreted when we conduct our investigation beyond the words that are being spoken. We need to understand the social terrain where these participants are making their expressions. Next slide, please. Now that article is quite a long article, and there's a lot to it, so I'm just going to pull out a few points. So to understand young people's voices as thickly, that they're, to analyze it in a thick way, it first of all needs to acknowledge that voice is elicited as a form of relational communication. And so when we are communicating with participants, we are communicating in two ways. First of all, we're using the communication as a means to an end. So we are using it to create trust, respect, build empathy, because then it will produce data. It could produce art. It could produce something it could produce cooperation where a child will put out their arm so you can start an intravenous. So the relational approach is a means, but what we're trying to put forward as a childhood ethics team is that the communication and the relationship is also an end in itself. Being respectful, we should not do it only because we want something from the child. It is a way of demonstrating a recognition of the young person's humanity, that the relationship that we form is one that can be reciprocally transformative. So that's one thing. The other thing is empathy. We normally think of empathy only as an emotional relationship and trying to understand what the other person is feeling. But empathy is not only about emotions, but it's also about the other person's way of thinking, the way they see things, the way they understand things. And so in order to interpret young people's voices as thick, we need to approach them with what I've described as empathic attunement. Attunement is like having two musical instruments being in tune with each other, where they resonate together, and there's a kind of harmony that's formed. And so you need to approach them with humility and sincere interest, not just to take data, extract data from them, but rather as an expression of human respect, that I care, I want to learn from you, and to approach each exchange as a possibility for your own transformation. And it's what Charles Taylor calls fusion of horizons. No, Gadamer calls fusion of horizons, and Charles Taylor is called rapprochement, bridging perspectives. And so when you really have an encounter with a young person in a clinical relationship or in research, if you use this approach to really try to form an empathic understanding of their experience, what's important to them, what concerns them, you need to really let yourself commit to this kind of humility, to want to get it as much as you can, so that you can try to have the greatest level of empathy that is established. This is the way I do ethics consultations. It's my job as an ethicist to try to figure out what is in this child's best interests. So when I want to understand from the child themselves what their interests are, I have to approach them this way. I will leave it at that. I mean, these are just some examples of the importance of the way in which we interpret young people's voices. And I will repeat, and I also will connect to this what I said before, the relational space, creating a safe space where the young person will feel safe to express what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and that you have allowed enough time and that you've done everything you can to manage the power differential so that they will see that your intention is to learn from them and with them respectfully. Next slide, please. Okay, so with all of that said, so ethnography is a methodology. A methodology has an ontology and epistemology, an orientation towards young people in the ways in which we've been talking about them in the 2 webinars, an orientation towards epistemology, and in this case, it's learning with them. It's a participatory, epistemological, and political orientation. So that's the methodology that is rooted in the ontology and epistemology that I've been describing. And then we need to use methods. Methods are techniques, the concrete ways in which we then go ahead and try to generate data. And so within participatory hermeneutic ethnography, as is the case with most ethnographies, we use 3 principal data sources: participant observation, interviews, and then analysis of documents and materials. In my view, every participatory hermeneutic ethnography must include participant observation. It is impossible to conduct a thick analysis of a young child's expression without participant observation. You need to understand the social context in which they are expressing themselves. What are they not saying? Silence, body movement, so-called nonverbal expression and communication. Otherwise, if you just look at recorded transcript, I really worry about misinterpreting what they are saying. And then, of course, we use interviews, documents, and materials. Next slide, please. So to elaborate on the principal data sources, and it is also within childhood studies strongly recognized that qualitative methods are important in doing research on childhood studies because they really help, they provide a certain amount of flexibility where you can continually adapt the way in which you conduct your research so that you can optimize their comfort and their feeling of safety. And you can continually even refine the way in which you ask questions and the way in which you observe. So qualitative research in general is very strongly respected within childhood studies in general. Participant observation is a primary method. And I want to say, and you'll see in a few moments, I will show, participant observation also includes informal interviews, chit-chat, conversations, on-the-fly discussions. And so participant observation is not just standing against the wall and trying to be a camera. The word participant means you're there, and acknowledge it. Acknowledge it that you're there, and that means it allows you to move in and out. You see something, you have an opportunity to play or ask a question, you cause a certain disruption that allows you to explore further what you think you understand. And so the participant part of participant observation is incredibly important, and in particular with young people, because otherwise you will be even more disruptive pretending that you're invisible, because you're not invisible as much as we might want to try. So we put a lot of importance in the ways in which we actively participate, and I'll show you an example shortly. Then, of course, interviews, but I prefer to call them conversations, because the word interview, and I'd say even with adults, interview sounds like a test, an examination. And so what we really are doing in qualitative research is usually it's a conversation. I want to chat with you about blah, blah, blah. What do you think about blah, blah, blah? Of course, and this is now really getting into Yvonne's big areas of expertise, and that's the use of art making and creative modes of expression, because we know that those are very, very familiar and comfortable ways for young people to express their agency. So artwork, as well as play and other types of movement, can be valuable ways of generating data. Textual productions, so diaries, blogs nowadays, or online blogs, could be digital sources. And I added a little one that I've been experimenting with lately. I've used it a little bit in palliative care, and I've been experimenting with my grandchildren quite a bit to really refine it. But I actually do use this clinically, and that's story making. We know that children are very familiar with storytelling, the use of storybooks. I've always found in palliative care, using a good story with good art, written by a brilliant writer, can really help to introduce the topic of life and death, and make it seem like it's a natural part of the world. So that's storybooks. Young people have a long history of really showing appreciation for storytelling, where you tell a story and it can be a very great way to engage them. What I've been developing is this idea of story making, like art making. And that is, you use this approach of storytelling, which is a narrative form. You know, I didn't make this up. There's a whole body of methods relating to narrative inquiry. But it's story making where you develop a story together. And so in your wanting to understand their moral experiences and their agency, you can sort of design the story where there are some key discussion points where you discuss with the young person, what do they think is going on here? What would they do if they were in that situation? And so it's a very dynamic exchange, and that could generate then a text that could also be part of your data. So again, that's the wonderful thing about qualitative research, is that you can really mobilize a lot of creativity. And then, of course, for children who communicate differently, some of them benefit from using various assistive communication methods. And if they are already using them, then make sure you include those in your design. Next slide, please. This is a paper that we published, and Myra Bluban-Langner, who I referred to at the beginning on Monday, the one who conducted the ethnography in pediatric oncology in 1978. I'm very proud that we published this paper together. And that is, we find that many times trying to do participant observation in clinical settings with children, research ethics committees usually lose their minds. They you can't do this. We have to protect the children. You can't do this. And so we published this paper to demonstrate how, in fact, not only can you do it, but we must do it. Because if we don't do this research, we're caring for them without knowing much about their experiences and what they need. And so this could be, a lot of our students always cite this paper when they're developing their proposal. Next slide, please. Now, I'm just going to run through. For those of you who are trying to learn participatory hermeneutic ethnography, it is best learned by seeing our publications, seeing the way we've done it, and the kinds of results we've generated. And so, for example, these are a bunch of, like, in the intensive care unit, children living with medical complexities. Next slide, please. These are a variety of studies that are conducted in more social or mental health contexts, in schools, in community organizations, children living with poverty. Next slide, please. This is the use of our voice childhood ethics frame in working with indigenous communities. And that requires a whole other political orientation in terms of partnership with indigenous leaders, indigenous youth advisors, and so on. And I say this because I know many Latin American countries have relationships with indigenous communities. And this is just a demonstration of using a global childhood perspective in some of the work we're doing in different parts of the world. And next slide, and where I want to really spend a few slides to demonstrate all of this in practice within a Latin American country. And this is a study conducted by our former PhD student, Aisa Pasos, who's from Santa Maria. Eliane Neves in Santa Maria and I worked with Naisa on some previous research, and then this was her PhD study. This is, to date, the first complete participatory hermeneutic ethnography conducted within a Latin American country. So I am hoping there will be many, many more. I am looking forward to that. I know there's a lot of very similar research that is being conducted by the talented people in this webinar, but this is the first one where we've used all of the theories and the methods that I've been describing. I strongly encourage anyone who is going to be trying to use these approach within a Latin American context to look at not only this article, but the bottom part of the slide, the actual thesis. There's a link there to the full thesis, because then you have a lot more detail. Because, you know, the article only has a few thousand words. The thesis has tens of thousands of words. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief summary of that study, but we'll skip this because time is passing quickly, and we're going to come back to it in a moment. So I mentioned the social imaginaries and horizons of significance. How do you investigate that? The way we do it within participatory hermeneutic ethnography is that we identify key documents. Key documents could be laws, court decisions, major decisions by the courts. It could be publications in newspapers, And these demonstrate certain types of dominant views within a community or within a society. So we use that as a big way of trying to understand the social imaginaries and horizon significance of a particular setting. And in this case, it was Rio Grande do Sul, where the research was southern Brazil, where the research was being conducted, as well as interviews with key informants. And so it could be policymakers, leaders of particular services, and it's not for them to tell us what the child's experience is. It's for us to investigate how they think. What is their attitude towards young people? It's very delicate to do these interviews because we have this hermeneutic motivation, and sometimes the way we analyze what they say, they may not feel very good about the way they look because they may be expressing ideas that you're not going to interpret as in a very positive way. Next slide, please. And so for Reis's research, for example, she highlighted very important themes that demonstrate the dominant social imaginaries in southern Brazil. So for example, in the key documents and the key informants that she interviewed, she saw a strong valuing of the sanctity of life. We must do everything to save a child. Not so much more about the quality of that life after, but if we got a child who's very, very injured in neonatology or in other areas, we must do everything we can to prolong life and save that life and keep them going because life is sacred and is valuable. And this was very visible in the analysis that she conducted. And the second theme, we see that children with disabilities are seen as broken. They are damaged. They are deficient. They are impaired. And you can imagine what it is like to be navigating spaces when this is the attitude that you have, and that policies and programs we're trying to make them normal. And I say normal with quotes here. Now, most people would think normalization, well, isn't that a good thing? Who wouldn't want to be normal? Well, it's not a good thing if you don't have access to it. You could have a different body. You might not have the same weight, the same height, the same capacity to concentrate, same capacity to hear and to see as other people, and to be called abnormal and to have the programs to make you normal can be incredibly frustrating, stigmatizing, and devaluing. And so these are very important qualities of the dominant social imaginary to be able to document. And then I'll just jump to the last one because this is incredibly important. How the analysis of the documents as well as the key informants revealed how there is an attitude of the good mother, and that the child's condition was tied to, and I'm saying, let's be clear, I'm saying good in quotes here. The way they are demonstrating that if the child is doing well, it's because they have a good mother. The child is not doing well, their mother's not good. The mother is not as devoted, is not as competent, not as educated. And so the mother is feeling guilt, is getting the message that, because if a child is doing well, the mother will be praised. What a good job you've done. This is great. Keep it up. And if the child's not doing well, then it's like, the mother has to be educated. And this is incredibly offensive. Without taking into consideration the biological differences of this child, without taking into consideration the extraordinary barriers, like, gee whiz, if you read the thesis, and I know you all know this, the hours it takes sometimes to go to one single medical appointment and appointments that are not coordinated. And so these families are not able to work, and they're completely fatigued, and they're having to neglect other children in the family just to get one appointment, and then they got to do it again another time. So there's a lack of respect for the extraordinary barriers that these families are navigating. And by families, it usually means mother. And so now there is an international literature that is a feminist critique on the good mother, the ways in which mothers are unfairly, disproportionately, and excessively responsibilized for children's outcomes. This is horrible. This is harmful. And it's really quite ignorant of the socio-political realities that these families are living, and distracts us from putting attention into systemic barriers. Let's fix the systemic barriers that are standing in the way of really optimizing this child's well-being, rather than dumping on the mother guilt and blame and responsibility. Next slide, please. So that's just showing you a way in which analyzing key documents and key stakeholders. So then, but then of course we like to have, this is participatory. So we have participants. And so in this particular thesis, these are the 7 young people who participated, and a little bit about their family and their diagnosis, just for your information. Of course, we got to throw in age, because people like to know that. Next slide, please. And then, so this ethnography was conducted over 7 months. I think some of you who are planning to do this research are going to be terrified over the next 2-3 slides. You're going to think, oh, good God, I'm not going to do that. But anyway, this is the way we did it here, because this was the first of its kind. We really wanted to do it well, and subsequent research in the same area can be more focused ethnography, if we already have the knowledge. So this was done over 7 months. Haisa had a lot of help from Eliane. Eliane really helped open a lot of doors and build access, and you need those power brokers in place to be able to access what is difficult to access. And so the children and the family helped to identify what they considered key moments in their routines, happy ones and happy ones. And so that meant, so Haisa just went along on medical appointments, went to school, rehabilitation sessions, birthday parties, religious rituals, hospitalizations. And again, look at this, journeys to different cities for medical appointments at specialized clinics. Now, many of you might be in a central city, and you need to be aware of, sometimes the child is coming to your city for an appointment, and people there might not be aware of how much a burden that is for the family to navigate. The observation sessions were 1 to 4 hours, depending on the family, the child, and sort of their special circumstances. And for anyone who has done participant observation, it's very hard to do more than 4 hours. Like, it is, because while you're doing it, you can only take very brief notes. You're not going to be there with your laptop typing out everything. You could be on the street, you could be on the sidewalk, you could be accompanying a child going to the bathroom. And so you can only write brief notes, and then everything else you have to try to remember it. And then before you go to sleep that night, you have to write it all out with thick detail. And the amount of participant observation sessions were 10 to 19 per child. So next slide, please. And in particular, I observed interactions within the family, interaction with healthcare professionals, and continually looked to see the way in which the child expressed what they wanted, what they hoped for, what they were worried about, but also examined the ways in which others responded to that. Next slide, please. And these slides are going to be available to all of you so you can see the details. Now, I want to emphasize this part. Participant observation is not just silent presence, but the informal interviewing, the chit-chat, the conversations are key, because it allows you to probe. Because you're going to have a hypothesis, oh, I think they're unhappy about that. Oh, they didn't like that. And so you can't, and it could be with the child themselves, or it could be with relational interlocutors, somebody who knows that child. If you have an opportunity, what does this mean? I don't understand what's going on. So the informal interviewing is continually conducted. And we practice participant observation with a big emphasis on the participant. And because you have to enter into that space so you know what's going on. Don't pretend to be invisible. But at the same time, don't make it about you. And I mean, don't just take over the whole space, because then you aren't really necessarily learning as much. So you have to find a right way to balance and to move in and out. And so here, just the examples that Aisa gave, is that she would step in and out of play encounters, and many times that was what the child was doing, and sometimes that was it, that was the thing. But many times it also created a safe, comfortable space for chit-chat. And then if you look at about close to the bottom, the second to bottom point, using dolls, children using play or dolls to be able to express what they're thinking. Or sometimes you can even do a little recreation simulation through play. Next slide, please. And so I want to give you a detailed quote from some of her analysis. So on the left are the main results published in the article. There's more themes in the thesis. And so dominating the experiences of these children, the moral experiences of these children, is the way normal is being defined in policy, and the way these children are described are pathologized. are imagined as deficient. And the norm basically defines all the policies and all the programs. Everything was oriented towards normalizing the child, regardless of this child and this family's potential, capacities, interests, aspirations, and concerns, without really looking at what is enriching for this child's everyday life. Just an example of how clinicians' epistemological oppression suppresses their ability to hear what is sometimes even so obvious. I will read it out word for word so it goes into the translator. So this is from her field notes. A child presented, so this is a summary of some field notes. A child presented episodes of intense crying after a physiotherapy session at home. The mother took the child to the pediatric emergency department. After a physical examination, the physician residents and their mentor, preceptor, concluded that the child did not have any other significant symptoms and asked the mother to return the next morning. According to the mother, her child did not sleep and screamed in pain when his diaper was being changed. The next day, the mother returned, and once again, the physicians on duty did not identify any other symptoms and reported that the child had an unidentified, unknown reason to cry. According to the mother, the physicians expressed that she was exaggerating because crying is something to be expected for a child with neurological impairments. The mother returned to the hospital after 3 days of going back and forth all these times, 3 days in a row, and then the physician on duty then did a radiological examination and revealed bilateral fracture of the femur and hip dislocation. You know, you would think, how much epistemological oppression operates in absolutely creating a barrier towards understanding what's going on. I'm trying to optimize our approach in how we do research with young people, but I'm going to go back to a statement I made on Monday. This orientation and this approach to understanding young people's voice is important not only for research, but for even the way in which we practice clinically. And for people who say they don't have enough time to be nice and to hear people's voices, their priority is the body. Well, you don't know what's going on with the body, because bodies are understood through the evaluation of symptoms, and you can only understand symptoms with a really safe, effective communication relationship. And this is, I think, shows it pretty wonderfully. Next slide. I think I'm almost at the end. Maybe I am at the end. Yeah. So this is just to tell you, if you go to our voice website, we have a lot of publications. As you can see, I keep throwing them at you. If you go to our website, and it's all by categories, and I really encourage you to find something that is in the area of work that you're doing, so that you can see some examples of the ways in which we've operationalized this methodology in very different types of settings. And that is my last slide. One last one, just to say thank you. And I am grateful. It took a long time. I'm sorry it took so long, but I guess it was comprehensive.
Franco, thank you very much for your presentation. I think that the last statement of the mother, it's so sad. And then we see that every day in the clinician area, every day. When we talk to children and the people don't listen to the symptom, the feeling. It's not. Oh my gosh! I don't like to say that, but it's look like a normalization. It's a normal way of people see children and the youth.
And the mother was not being treated as the interlocutor, as the interpreter, as the person who knows the child the best, who can be their voice, could be amplifying their voice.
Yes, exactly. The mother could be amplifying their voice, and also the voice of children, because he or she, I don't remember, I was so concentrated in the story. He was crying with pain. And it's incredible. But that's essa é a realidade que nós temos contato no dia a dia, quando desenvolvemos pesquisas e as famílias trazem para a gente as experiências de ausência de escuta, né, do modo de viver da criança, especialmente essas que têm deficiência, são clinicamente complexas, que têm uma necessidade de saúde, né, diferenciada, né, em comparação com as crianças em geral, e é muito difícil, às vezes, você convencer, né, o clínico que é cético em relação ao poder, né, e a capacidade de comunicação da criança, essas pessoas que têm o poder de amplificar a voz da criança, né? Miriam, pode falar, por favor. Fique à vontade.
Eu não vou conseguir me segurar. Eu estava pensando muito sobre isso, Ivone. Nossa, esses exemplos que o Franco dá, eles são muito impactantes, e tu tens toda a razão, né? Eu quero aqui trazer realmente a experiência da prática clínica, o quanto nós, muitas vezes, desenvolvemos, nós agora eu estou me incluindo na categoria de enfermeiros, né? O quanto nós desenvolvemos sofrimento moral por perceber esse tipo de comportamento, né, e de desvalorização das queixas, tanto das mães quanto das crianças, né? E isso aí eu estou trazendo numa perspectiva das tentativas que nós fazemos, porque nós não somos formados para ouvir, né? Isso é pura verdade. Então, nós tentamos, mas nós não somos formados para compreender as vozes das crianças e ouvi-las, né? E ainda assim sofremos moralmente pelo fato delas não serem compreendidas, né? Outra coisa que eu estava pensando é os esforços que nós temos feito mais no campo metodológico mesmo do positivismo, em traduzir as vozes das crianças em instrumentos, né? Então, eu vou trazer aqui a questão das escalas de dor, né? Então, a gente tenta, né, com dispositivos, assim, muito positivistas, né, muito numéricos, tentar interpretar o que significa a dor e a quantidade de dor para uma criança, né? Então, nossa, Franco, muito obrigada. Isso, nós temos tanto em que pensar, né, das mudanças que nós temos que fazer, tanto no cenário da pesquisa quanto da prática clínica.
Uhum. Outro aspecto, eu acho importante destacar, é a valorização da expressão da criança e do jovem no sofrimento psíquico, né? O sofrimento psíquico hoje, as crianças estão gritando, né? Eles estão pedindo ajuda e a gente não está sabendo interpretar o pedido de ajuda. Eu tenho um caso de uma criança que a gente acompanhou lá na saúde na escola, que a criança estava gritando, né, que ela estava dizendo para a gente que ela estava sendo abusada. Ela estava sendo abusada e as pessoas não não reconheciam, né, os sinais do abuso. E ela dizendo exatamente quem era o abusador, e as pessoas ignoravam, até que essa criança, ela tentou o suicídio. Então, veja bem, a gente evolui para um caso tão dramático, né, que a criança não tem poder sobre... O adulto tem um poder enorme sobre a criança, e ele oprime a criança, usando, às vezes, estratégias intimidadoras. Ela entra numa zona de sofrimento psíquico tão intenso, um transtorno mental tão intenso, que, para chamar a atenção, ela tenta o suicídio. Aí as pessoas vão escutá-la. Então, assim, é muito complexo a forma como nós, realmente, Miriam tem razão, nós não aprendemos a ouvir, mas nós somos o tempo inteiro defensores de uma escuta sensível. Só que não nos preparamos para essa escuta sensível. Acho que é uma oportunidade que tem da gente trabalhar com ferramentas, seja de investigação ou ferramentas de abordagem clínica, colocar a criança no centro, os seus amplificadores de voz no centro do cuidado, né? Acho que eu queria contribuir aqui com esse debate de hoje, em relação às ferramentas, os métodos que a gente pode estar adotando. Mas está aberto aí, gente, temos 1 minuto, mais uns 5 minutinhos para poder estar encerrando a nossa tarde, nessa tarde-noite. O grupo que está na América Latina, se gostaria, a Jocelyn, se gostaria de fazer algum comentário para a gente estar encerrando. E, gente, assim, agradecer...
¿Me escuchan?
Sim, sim.
Ok. Sí, Muy interesante.
Agora não se escuta mais.
Ahora me escuchan.
Agora sim.
Bien. Ahora sí. Muy interesante lo que presenta Franco. En realidad, muchas veces no escuchamos a los niños, ¿no? No escuchamos a los niños. Es importante, pues, que nosotros que estamos en el cuidado de estos niños, de nuestros adolescentes, estemos siempre pendientes de cómo ellos se manifiestan. Bueno, yo le comento, voy a dejar de... Ya. Yo le comento, pues, yo trabajo en un área de hospitalización donde tenemos niños de alta especialidad, bueno, niños que vienen transferidos de diferentes partes del Perú, porque es un hospital con enfermedades crónicas. Entonces, tenemos pues muchos niños, como mencionan, ¿no? Justo en la guardia que tuve, tiene una niña que tenía 11 años que me miraba y me miraba, pero era una mirada que tenía dolor. Yo le preguntaba, del 1 al 10, ¿cuánto te duele? Por no preocupar a la abuelita, decía 2, 3, ¿no? Entonces yo le decía, no, pero algo te pasa porque tu frecuencia cardíaca, yo tuve que explicarle, está acelerada, ¿no? Entonces, vamos, pero no, después iba pasando la guardia y luego me decía que ya no podía respirar. La saturo, le tomamos el AGA y efectivamente, pues la niña tenía algo, ¿no? Le digo a la doctora, le toman una placa y efectivamente, pues tenía un derrame pleural. Entonces, desde temprano, gracias a Dios, me di cuenta de la forma cómo me miraba. No era una mirada de siempre, ¿no? Es una niña que con enfermedad renal crónica que tiene catéter de hemodiálisis y y el cuidado de enfermedad, o sea, cómo te puede informar una mirada, un gesto de lo que siente, ¿no? De lo que siente, y si tú lo conoces y sabes cómo son, rápidamente puedes hacer una evolución de enfermería, puedes hacer una valoración de enfermería e identificar lo que está teniendo tu paciente en ese momento, ¿no? Entonces, qué importante este curso que estamos haciendo ahora porque nos está llevando a conocer, a identificar un poco más allá. Y como le decía doctora Ivonne, es que el niño, nosotros tenemos que verlo como es el niño y el adolescente, no lo tenemos que interpretar, no lo tenemos, sino tenemos que entender qué es lo que él siente, entender lo que él nos está diciendo, lo que él nos está manifestando. Y pues en la investigación cualitativa lo tenemos que tomar tal como ellos nos lo dicen, ¿no? No lo podemos nosotros significativamente analizar y dar con nuestras propias palabras lo que él nos quiere decir. No, tenemos que, como dice Franco, tenemos que hacer lo que ellos, interpretar lo que ellos nos dicen, lo que es, lo real, ¿no? Lo correcto. Entonces, qué importante, ay, discúlpenme, no quiero deshabilitar el subtítulo porque está, no me quiere dejar de, bueno, ya ahora sí. Qué importante, me distraigo, ¿no? Qué importante es que nosotros, como enfermeras, identifiquemos es lo que nos quiere decir nuestros niños, ¿no? ¿Qué es lo que realmente siente? ¿Qué es lo que realmente siente nuestro adolescente? Tal vez si nosotros conociéramos más y enseñáramos a los papás, podríamos prevenir hasta los suicidios, como mencionaba. Podríamos prevenir muchas cosas, ¿no? Hay niños, por ejemplo, que son, en la realidad, tenemos niños con enfermedades crónicas que a la vez que vienen por una neumonía, también son autistas. O incluso los padres, el niño tiene un problema oncológico, pero los padres tienen algún problema de Asperger o autismo. Entonces, que realmente nunca fueron diagnosticados y con el trato que nosotros tenemos con los padres, identificamos que estos papás tienen algún problema. Entonces, qué interesante que nosotros podamos identificar y saber cómo tratar. No solamente la enfermera viene un cuidado terapéutico, sino va más allá. Va más allá. Yo mucho lo interiorizo con lo que yo vengo haciendo en el día a día, ¿no? Entonces va más allá y como dice el doctor, que aprende más con los cuentos. Y cuando se me venía a la cabeza me acordaba mucho de mi hija, ¿no? Mi hija ahora ya tiene 28 años y yo recuerdo que desde muy niña le inculqué la lectura. Y tal vez todo lo que ella aprendió fue de las lecturas que ella tuvo. Entonces, qué importante saber cómo llegar a nuestros jóvenes y adolescentes actualmente y nuestros niños, porque ellos están ahora metidos frente a una pantalla y cómo ahora ¿cómo podemos educarlos, no? ¿Cómo podemos ahora hacer de que ellos toda la información que nosotros podamos brindarle o el apoyo que les podemos brindar? Porque el niño puede estar muy bien frente a la cámara. A veces los papás, porque tienen trabajo, desde muy pequeños lo ponen frente a la pantalla del celular, de la pantalla de la computadora o del televisor, y los papás se ponen a hacer sus cosas. Pero esos niños, emocionalmente, ¿cómo están? Están creciendo y lo vemos en la práctica. Yo lo veo el día a día, a veces cuando un niño está en la práctica, estamos trabajando con ellos, son unos lactantes de 4, 5, 6 meses, y la mamá le digo, señora, retire el celular, no es bueno. Le retira el celular y el niño empieza a dar un llanto inconsolable, porque se acostumbró a la pantalla, ¿no? Entonces, ¿qué estamos haciendo? Estamos haciendo una sobrecarga al niño de las pantallas, de la información. Entonces, qué importante, y como decía el doctor, que tal vez vamos a tener que retroceder un poco, ¿no? Y qué bueno que en otros países se están aplicando esta metodología, y en verdad me interesa bastante para poder seguir, pues nosotros, como digo, no solamente damos cuidado, pues, biológico, sino también nosotros damos un cuidado más allá, como en todas las esferas.
Creo que estamos muy... Muchas gracias, José, y agradecer también al Franco por su participación el día de hoy. Sus últimas palabras, Francos, por favor. Your last words for finish this day.
Well, I mean, I think Justin's comments, I really appreciated them. I just think right now, children in dentist chairs, children in oncology department, children who are having various blood tests being done, simple thing, where, you know, a lot of times it's like a factory where it's just do it fast, get it over with. How much harm young people are being exposed to, and no one is checking to verify if they're okay. So, I mean, I think we've been, Jocelyn's examples, she described a couple. I mean, that was really awful, the one at the beginning. And the one from the study that I presented, these are extreme. I'm especially concerned, and as I said, we have a paper coming out soon, about the less extraordinary, everyday, small harms, disrespect, hurt that we are cumulatively exposing children to that are causing accumulated trauma. I hope we can all feel restless, worried. There's an urgency to this work. And it's not just about being nice with children, which is important all by itself, but it means that even the example of how do we assess clinical symptoms, like pain, for example, the two examples, mine and Jocelyn's, it's an injustice.
It's an injustice.
So on that happy note.
Yeah. So I think that we finished today. I will ask everybody. Oi, ok, pessoal, acho que nós estamos terminando. Vou pedir para abrir as câmeras para a gente fazer o registro daquelas pessoas que puderem abrir suas câmeras para a gente fazer a nossa memorável fotografia, da nossa tarde e noite. Obrigada aí pela presença de todos. Ainda tem gente com câmera fechada. A Norma, pastora, Olga. Olga tá bonita aqui, Olga. Você tá 2 vezes, Olga. Oh, poderosa essa mulher.
Doctora, gracias.
Yoli, Juliana, tudo bem? Michele, cadê? Ah, você está aí. Muito bem. Os que estão, Lia. Andréia, que bom te ver. Abre essa câmera aí para a gente sair na fotografia. Cadê? Ah, agora sim, tudo bem? Vou fazer outra. Ok, Tamires, Lídia, obrigada, pessoal, a presença de todas e todos, e nos vemos na próxima semana. We see each other in the next one. Thank you, Franco.
Tchau.
Tchau, tchau.
Bye, bye. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada, eu vou
Tchau,
fechar.
tchau, gente. Obrigada.
Tchau, obrigada.
Obrigada.
Boa noite daqui de Portugal.
Boa noite.